and I replied, "Lord, I close the bargain right here." When the sheriff came in my front door by Homer Croy. Novelist, 150 Pinehurst Avenue, New York, New York. The bitterest moment of my life occurred one day in 1933 when the sheriff came in the front door and I went out the back. I had lost my home at 10 Standish Road, Forest Hills, Long Island, where my children were born and where I and my family had lived for 18 years. I had never dreamed that this could happen to me. 12 years before, I thought I was sitting on top of the world. I had sold the motion picture rights to my novel West of the Water Tower for a top Hollywood price. I lived abroad with my family for 2 years. We summered in Switzerland and wintered on the French Riviera just like the idle rich. I spent 6 months in Paris and wrote a novel entitled They Had to See Paris. Will Rogers appeared in the screen version. It was his first talking picture. I had tempting offers to remain in Hollywood and write several of Will Rogers' pictures. But I didn't. I returned to New York. And my troubles began. It slowly dawned on me that I had great dormant abilities that I had never developed. I began to fancy myself a shrewd businessman. Somebody told me that John Jacob Astor had made millions investing in vacant land in New York. Who was Astor? Just an immigrant peddler with an accent. If he could do it, why couldn't I? I was going to be rich. I began to read the yachting magazines. I had the courage of ignorance. I didn't know any more about buying and selling real estate than an Eskimo knows about oil furnaces. How was I to get the money to launch myself on my spectacular financial career? That was simple. I mortgaged my home, and bought some of the finest building lots in Forest Hills. I was going to hold this land until it reached a fabulous price, then sell it and live in luxury. I who had never sold a piece of real estate as big as a doll's handkerchief. I pitied the plodders who slaved in offices for a mere salary. I told myself that God had not seen fit to touch every man with the divine fire of financial genius. Suddenly, the Great Depression swept down upon me like a Kansas cyclone and shook me as a tornado would shake a hen coop. I had to pour $220 a month into that monster-mouthed piece of good earth. Oh, how fast those months came! In addition, I had to keep up the payments on our now mortgaged house and find enough food. I was worried. I tried to write humor for the magazines. My attempts at humor sounded like the Lamentations of Jeremiah. I was unable to sell anything. The novel I wrote failed. I ran out of money. I had nothing on which I could borrow money except my typewriter and the gold fillings in my teeth. The milk company stopped delivering milk. The gas company turned off the gas. We had to buy one of those little outdoor camp stoves you see advertised. It had a cylinder of gasoline. You pump it up by hand and it shoots out a flame with a hissing like an angry goose. We ran out of coal. The company sued us. Our only heat was the fireplace. I would go out at night and pick up boards and leftovers from the new homes that the rich people were building, I who had started out to be one of these rich people. I was so worried I couldn't sleep. I often got up in the middle of the night and walked for hours to exhaust myself so I could fall asleep. I lost not only the vacant land I had bought, but all my heart's blood that I had poured into it. The bank closed the mortgage on my home and put me and my family out on the street. In some way, we managed to get hold of a few dollars and rent a small apartment. We moved in the last day of 1933. I sat down on a packing case and looked around. An old saying of my mother's came back. Don't cry over spilt milk. But this wasn't milk. This was my heart's blood. After I had sat there a while I said to myself, well, I've hit bottom and I've stood it. There's no place to go now but up. I began to think of the fine things that the mortgage had not taken from me. I still had my health and my friends. I would start again. I would not grieve about the past. I would repeat to myself every day the words I had often heard my mother say about spilt milk. I put into my work the energy that I had been putting into worrying. Little by little, my situation began to improve. I am almost thankful now that I had to go through all that misery. It gave me strength, fortitude, and confidence. I know now what it means to hit bottom. I know it doesn't kill you. I know we can stand more than we think we can. When little worries and anxieties and uncertainties try to disturb me now, I banish them by reminding myself of the time I sat on the packing case and said, "I've hit bottom and I've stood it. There is no place to go now but up." What's the principle here? Don't try to saw sawdust. Accept the inevitable. If you can't go lower, yon can try going up. The toughest opponent I ever fought was worry by Jack Dempsey. During my career in the ring, I found that old man worry was an almost tougher opponent than the heavyweight boxers I fought. I realized that I had to learn to stop worrying, or worry would sap my vitality and undermine my success. So, little by little, I worked out a system for myself. Here are some of the things I did. 1. To keep up my courage in the ring, I would give myself a pep talk during the fight. For example, while I was fighting Firpo, I kept saying over and over, "Nothing is going to stop me. He is not going to hurt me. I won't feel his blows. I can't get hurt. I am going to keep going, no matter what happens." Making positive statements like that to myself, and thinking positive thoughts, helped me a lot. It even kept my mind so occupied that I didn't feel the blows. During my career, I have had my lips smashed, my eyes cut, my ribs cracked, and Firpo knocked me clear through the ropes, and I landed on a reporter's typewriter and wrecked it. But I never felt even one of Firpo's blows. There was only one blow that I ever really felt. That was the night Lester Johnson broke 3 of my ribs. The punch never hurt me, but it affected my breathing. I can honestly say I never felt any other blow I ever got in the ring. 2. Another thing I did was to keep reminding myself of the futility of worry. Most of my worrying was done before the big bouts, while I was going through training. I would often lie awake at nights for hours, tossing and worrying, unable to sleep. I would worry for fear I might break my hand or sprain my ankle or get my eye cut badly in the first round so I couldn't coordinate my punches. When I got myself into this state of nerves, I used to get out of bed, look into the mirror, and give myself a good talking to. I would say, "What a fool you are to be worrying about something that hasn't happened and may never happen. Life is short. I have only a few years to live, so I must enjoy life." I kept saying to myself, "Nothing is important but my health. Nothing is important but my health." I kept reminding myself that losing sleep and worrying would destroy my health. I found that by saying these things to myself over and over, night after night, year after year, they finally got under my skin, and I could brush off my worries like so much water. 3. The third and best thing I did was pray. While I was training for a bout, I always prayed several times a day. When I was in the ring, I always prayed just before the bell sounded for each round. That helped me fight with courage and confidence. I have never gone to bed in my life without saying a prayer. And I have never eaten a meal in my life without first thanking God for it. Have my prayers been answered? Thousands of times. I prayed to God to keep me out of an orphan's home by Kathleen Halter. Housewife, 1074 Roth, University City 14, Missouri. As a little child, my life was filled with horror. My mother had heart trouble. Day after day, I saw her faint and fall to the floor. We all feared she was going to die. And I believed that all little girls whose mothers died were sent to the Central Wesleyan Orphans' Home, located in the little town of Warrenton, Missouri, where we lived. I dreaded the thought of going there, and when I was 6 years old I prayed constantly. "Dear God, please let my mummy live until I am old enough not to go to the orphans' home." 20 years later, my brother, Meaner, had a terrible injury and suffered intense pain until he died 2 years later. He couldn't feed himself or turn over in bed. To deaden his pain, I had to give him morphine hypodermics every 3 hours, day and night. I did this for 2 years. I was teaching music at the time at the Central Wesleyan College in Warrenton, Missouri. When the neighbors heard my brother screaming with pain, they would telephone me at college and I would leave my music class and rush home to give my brother another injection of morphine. Every night when I went to bed, I would set the alarm clock to go off 3 hours later so I would be sure to get up to attend to my brother. I remember that on winter nights I would keep a bottle of milk outside the window, where it would freeze and turn into a kind of ice cream that I loved to eat. When the alarm went off, this ice cream outside the window gave me an additional incentive to get up. In the midst of all these troubles, I did 2 things that kept me from indulging in self-pity and worrying and embittering my life with resentment. First, I kept myself busy teaching music from 12 to 14 hours a day, so I had little time to think of my troubles. And when I was tempted to feel sorry for myself, I kept saying to myself over and over, "Now, listen, as long as you can walk and feed yourself and are free from intense pain, you ought to be the happiest person in the world. No matter what happens, never forget that as long as you live. Never. Never." I was determined to do everything in my power to cultivate an unconscious and continuous attitude of gratefulness for my many blessings. Every morning when I awoke, I would thank God that conditions were no worse than they were. And I resolved that in spite of my troubles I would be the happiest person in Warrenton, Missouri. Maybe I didn't succeed in achieving that goal, but I did succeed in making myself the most grateful young woman in my town, and probably few of my associates worried less than I did. This Missouri music teacher applied 2 principles described in this book. She kept too busy to worry, and she counted her blessings. The same technique may be helpful to you. I was acting like an hysterical woman by Cameron Ship magazine writer. I had been working very happily in the publicity department of the Warner Brothers studio in California for several years. I was a unit man and feature writer. I wrote stories for newspapers and magazines about Warner Brothers stars.